Welcome everyone to episode 42 of the Brandon Adams podcast. I have with me Bill Perkins. Bill, I've been trying to get you in here for a while. Thank you very much for doing this.
I'm glad that it all came together. You know, F1 brought us together, so we were able to carve out some early time for me, given that we've been raging all week.
And this is my second ever live podcast, which I'm pretty fired up about. You can see I've put some work into the studio.
Yes, it's come together nicely.
So you are crushing life lately. Your pictures on Twitter blew up Twitter. That was one of the most impressive transformations I've ever seen. Take us back to 6 months ago. What made you decide to go on this health kick, and what is the final destination, this 8% body fat V2?
Yeah, I mean, the final destination is always the grave. So you want to enjoy the ride, right? It's never about the destination. It's about the journey. But I've always been, say, quasi healthy or very conscious of my health, where I'm at, how it impacts your fulfillment, how you feel, etc. Except, you know, habits kind of rule who you are. You know, it's impossible to always be off autopilot, and your habits kind of take over. And so during the pandemic, when the early numbers were coming out and everybody was like holding up or isolating, I was running the odds, and I was like, well, it looks like within 3 years, there's a 1 in 20 chance I'm going to die. And so I had this idea of like, the long term is really truncated probabilistically, right? And so I was developing these habits, and I tell people I was eating like a prisoner on death row. Like, I didn't care. I was like, well, there is no future, so what does it matter? I'm going to die in 3 years, right? And so, you know, the data changed, and as information came out and started to figure out what the hell was going on and what the odds of dying looked like, it's like my mindset has changed, right? Like, I'm not going to die in 3 years, but my habits didn't. And so these habits had set over 3 months. And then over the next course of a year and a half, you know, just tiny changes in these habits blew me up. You know, I'm let's say like 195 is steady state, 190 is steady state, right? 200 extra calories over 2 years is 41 pounds of equivalent energy. You know, you're not going to store it all. So-called, you know, you're 35 pounds overweight. And if you're 35 pounds overweight on a 200-pound frame, you're damn near obese. You're obese or not obese over 2 years, right? And so I'm getting married. There's a joint bachelorette party. So, you know, my fiance's friends are going to be there. I'm going to be there. I'm like, I want to look good, right? I want to look good for my marriage. I also want to be healthy. But I was on vacation, and I weighed myself, and I looked at myself, and I was just like, tears were welling up. I was like, what? How did I get here? You know, what choices had me get to this point? And I knew the answer was, but I was just kind of really saying to myself, like, why didn't I stop myself? You know, and you know, when you're on autopilot, you just don't know. There's no prompt or sign to say, hey, stop this behavior, right? So the scale was the big giant prompt. Looking myself in the mirror was a big giant prompt. And the wedding and the bachelor party was a big giant prompt for me to do something. And so I have good friends, they bet me, right? Which was another big prompt, right? Like, you can't do it. And there's nothing telling an arrogant, arrogant, confident guy, like, you can't do it, right? It's like the extra motivation to go ahead and do it as well. But I was going to do it anyway. And
the ultimate objective was 8% body fat?
The bet was sub 9%. It was like, can you go from like 24-ish, right, to sub 9? And you know, I'm a fairly lazy person. I tell people I'm very lazy, and it's true. That's my natural state, right? They see me doing things and discipline or forming habits that actually get to a goal, and they think, you're not that lazy, yada yada. I'm like, no, my natural state is the couch. I love it. I love relaxing. I love thinking. I love meditating. So with that in hand, you know, the bet was set, and there was, you know, I say, like, you could have cut off a leg, I was still going to.
So the key parts of your program, the bet was a motivation. you seem to have, based on the Twitter timeline, no real setbacks in these 6 months, although you say the last 3 months were the height of discipline. The key aspects were your trainer, Dwayne, who I want to hear about how you connected with him, your Peloton.
Yes.
And a fairly tight calorie regime that had you running extended deficits of 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day.
Yeah. I think the main thing was, finding Dwayne. So I knew, I'm a vegetarian and I wanted to find a trainer that worked with vegetarians. And kind of understood, what I'm going to be able to eat and not eat. And, so the first thing about winning is designing it, right? Like designing my journey. And I was like, okay, I need to have bodybuilder who works with vegetarian, because bodybuilders, this is what they do, right? You see these guys, they're going on stage 4%, 3%. They know all the latest science and how it reacts. They're not, there's not theoretical. They're like the guinea pigs of every type of routine, supplement, diet, etc. Right. And so these guys know what they're doing, and they've been doing it for 15, 20 years. Right. In the case of Dwayne. And so we searched and we found Dwayne. He is a all natural bodybuilding champion. There's a lot of vegetarians in this gym. And he said, be fine. It's going to work. And so I really trust experts in their field when in terms of body transformations, because this is what they do. Like when I go to the doctor, I don't go, hey doc, let me help you here with this brain surgery, this hip surgery. Are you using the right scalpel, et cetera? I'm like, no, you have the credentials. I trust you, and I shut the F up. And you know what I mean? I let you do your job. And so this is kind of like my modus operandi with this bet is first get the experts on your team to help you get there.
And then you were a good listener effectively.
Yeah.
Like you just did what they said to do quite consistently.
Yeah. I use the doctor model. Like if you go to a doctor and he's a great doctor and you trust him, or you got a second opinion, you can go to 2 doctors or whatever. But like when they say, hey, this is your issue, this is what you need to do, take this twice a day, don't do this, do X, Y, and Z, most people do it, right? And then it solves their issue, right? So I had a body issue that I needed to solve, and I went to the expert, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to go, whatever you say, I'm going to do. And so he completely was in charge of my diet, right? Like they asked the questions like, what do you eat? What do you don't eat? I don't like onions, et cetera. I'm a vegetarian, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, this is what we're going to do, right? So my meals were broken up into 5 meals a day, certain macros, et cetera. I'm fortunate enough to have a chef. It doesn't come to me, it went straight to the chef. And that's what happened. And so there was no decision making for me with regards to what I ate when I worked out, and how much I ate and the macros. It was all in the hands of experts, right?
And I noticed you didn't have a cutting and bulking phase the way someone usually might if they were getting to your end result. It was sort of all done at the same time. You were working hard throughout and you were cutting calories throughout. Is that true?
Not completely. I didn't, once again, like I would ask questions kind of like, hey, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? It went in phases. In the beginning, it seemed like it was hell, right? Like it was like that, so many workouts a day in terms of just cardio, like before you eat, after you eat, and then 45 minutes at night. And then the workouts, which were always 30 minutes of weight training. And people say only 30 minutes. I'm like, it's hell. There's no rest, right? You just you rest by doing a different muscle group. So, I felt like my heart was going to explode during these workouts. But, as we progressed, there would be days where the calories that I would eat in a day would go, there was low, medium, and high day. And there would be once in a while a high day, right? To feed the muscles, right? Because as it was explained to me, and I didn't research it completely, but that your body is either breaking down or it's building, right? It doesn't do both at the same time. And so we'd be, doing weights, but breaking down fat, and eliminating it. With that is also you're breaking down muscle tissue while you're doing weights, right? And then we need to feed the muscle a certain day, like rest and feed the muscle. And so Dwayne was in charge with that. And, there'd be this one high day, which I would feel stuffed. Like a medium day, I would feel stuffed. Like my normal calorie burn, because I was so used to eating, I think 1,600 calories a day, 1,590, 1,600 calories a day, that when it went up to like 2,500, I'd be like, this is way too much food, right? And towards the end, when I was getting closer to the goal and we were like feeding the muscle more, I would have like 3 high days in a row. And it was like 3,500, 3,600, 3,800 calories. And I was just like, this is crazy. Now, keep in mind, when I was vacationing 2 years ago, I might eat 4,000, 5,000 calories in a day, no problem, right? And so it's amazing how your stomach shrinks and you get used to a certain amount of calories coming into your body, right?
And you were running pretty tight in terms of no alcohol. You would go out to eat, but you would specify ahead of time the menu. Yeah.
So I'm not a big drinker anyway, but there was 0 alcohol, no added sugars. I mean, there was some foods that had some extra sugar in it, particularly on high days. But, when my morning stack would sometimes be a vegetarian protein shake, some carrots and some celeries, right? And the carrots are so sweet to me, right? Because it was like, wow, did somebody put sugar in these carrots? That type of thing, because you're eating lean. And when I went out, you call ahead. The menu was researched. Call ahead. What's in there? What's the portions? Design it. So whenever I went out, it was easy for me to eat. I didn't come in clueless and then overeat or ruin my diet. And I say romance is planning and passion is spontaneity. And so I like to be very romantic. And so going out to eat, there's no hassle. Lara, my fiance, she still got a piece of me and we still got to do things, but then I would come in prepared, right? So I would read off my phone. I'll have this, no onions. No onions, goddammit.
I like it. One of my favorite things about your book and your Twitter feed is that you question a lot of assumptions that other people don't question, and you recognize trade-offs where other people don't recognize trade-offs. As it relates to diet, you have, for instance, the treadmill minutes to cookie ratio.
Yeah,
and I saw you yesterday snacking on the occasional chip or popcorn, and presumably in your mind, you're thinking like...
Yeah. I was actually, this has been a pretty wild and fun weekend coming here to F1. And I'm thinking like, okay, I know I have snack. I know I have X, my snack periods of calories. And I remember, you didn't see this, but we were at Carbone and there was a cheesecake there. And I took a little bite and I was like, okay, this is worth an hour. And I took another bite. This is actually worth an hour on the treadmill. It's going to hurt, but this is worth it. I was like, this is the best damn cheesecake I've ever tasted in my entire life. And so I was not going to give up on that experience, but I knew I'd be paying for it later, but it was worth an hour.
I love it. And as it relates to finances, which a lot of Die with Zero is about, I just finished my second reading.
Yeah.
You say that a lot of people have unquestioned assumptions regarding retirement savings, regarding spending decisions. You have a passage in there about Steve Levitt, where Steve Levitt arrived for his first job, and he was quite frugal. And an older colleague took him aside and said, "Steve, like, this is not the way to run your life. You should be spending now the way you envision spending 15 years from now when you're a tenured faculty member. This is not the time to save, because for sure you will be earning much more in 15 years. You should be borrowing now and then do your saving when you're 50 years old."
Yeah, he was basically teaching about income smoothing. But I want to explain the time thing real quick, because I didn't do a real thing about cookies and time in case people were there. So for me, if I work very, very hard on a Peloton, right, I'm busting my ass. And probably an hour of work is like 660, 700 calories. But I got to subtract out the 100 calories that I would do doing nothing. So it's a net plus 600 calories, right? And it's very painful. And most of the time my workouts on a Peloton are only 45 minutes. So now I'm doing an extra 15 minutes. So if I go and eat 2 cookies, it's about an hour on the Peloton, right? And so those cookies got to be worth an hour of my time busting my ass, like hurting on the Peloton. So I think about that in terms of, you know, am I going to overeat here? Am I going to indulge in this experience and pay the price later? And that's kind of the cookie to time ratio that's always going around my head, given that I want to be in a certain shape and maintain a certain weight.
Do you think most people in practice, like, imagine themselves doing a program like you just completed? See, I kind of think that most people that have severe constraints on their time and stuff, they don't do that treadmill to cookie ratio because they assume that if they really wanted to, they could accomplish what you did in the last 6 months. They could just do it all at once. Whereas in fact, no one does what you did.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of planning and a lot of design and a lot of motivation converging to do that. And I don't think people think, you know, oh, that's going to take an hour of my time. And if they do, they would begin to realize like how little free time to have to slot an extra hour to go be on a treadmill. Right. And so I always, you know, you come to the quick realization is diet is 85% of it. Like you don't have the time to eat the way, you know, TV advertises to you, right? Like have this double bowl so-and-so and these chips and nachos, you know, the way you're advertised for all these meals that are like, you know, the salad is 2,000 calories, the so-and-so is X, Y, and Z. And if you started, you know, if that came up with time instead of calories, it'd be like, okay, that's 2 hours, this is 3 hours, this is 30 minutes, this is an hour. You'd be like, I can't do that. Right. And so you realize like the best thing to do is to avoid putting it into your system, not just for the time reason, the cholesterol and all the other stuff like that. Right. But that's what I've come to the conclusion is like, it's just not worth the time. And sometimes things taste so good, the experience of pleasure. I'm like, it's worth the time. You know, I'll do it. I'll suffer. But that's that. I just wanted to go a little bit further into that cookie to time ratio, because I think it's important, you know, not to go like, oh, I have the time, but like, I think you come to the realization is that I don't have the time, right? Like it's going to cost me a lot. And then when you start doing the secondary calculation, like an hour of my time, let's say you go to work, an hour of your time is worth $50, right? You make $50 an hour, whatever it is. Not only is then you start to think, well, eating that cookie, well, I paid $3 for this thing, right? These 2 cookies, but then it's going to cost me $50 in my time to balance it out. Yeah. And then you're like, shit, this is an expensive cookie. But I will say that Carbone cheesecake was worth it. It was worth the 2 hours. It was worth it. It was worth an hour to me.
So,
but back to Steve, or you want to?
Well, in your book, it's essentially arguing that the most important optimization problem that we have to solve is a multifaceted problem of time, money, energy, and health. And most people navigate this poorly. And your broad recommendation is that health is always first at almost every stage of life. Time is second, or rather, as soon as you can afford to prioritize time second, you should.
Right.
And money is third, and many people, in your estimation, don't think of money properly, where it should properly be thought of as a means to an end. And in particular, you note that many of your friends are fairly high income and wealth, and when they have enough, they should sort of stop definitionally accumulating, but they often don't.
Right.
And your experience is many people should be trading in money for the most important thing, health, and for time, energy, and experiences far sooner than they do.
Yeah. You know, the trying to unpack which way I want to go with this, with the friends of people that the money is a tool, right? It's a tool to achieve, you know, the experiences, the things you want to have to help you with your net fulfillment. And somehow along the way, the habits they form, right? They got really good at acquiring capital, and they had to form habits to do it. And these habits tend to take over, and somehow that becomes the goal, right? It's like, oh, I need a hammer to build a house. They get a hammer, they get 2 hammers, they get 3 hammers, they got 700 hammers, and they still haven't built the house, right? It's kind of like, the goal is not the hammers. The goal is the house. You know, like, stop accumulating hammers. You have enough hammers already. You know, you got 3 workers, 3 hammers. Let's go. You know, and so that happens in kind of like the same way that like I blew up and became obese or near obese. They become, you know, flooded with capital and let their dreams go by. They don't build the house, right? And then they have this thing called the grave. Death is coming for all of us, and their body is deteriorating. And so now, you know, these guys were going to build a 2-story house, but the health won't even let them walk up to the top story, right? So they waited too long to build the house. Right now, they got to build a 1-story, right? And then so on. And this analogy, right, that I'm using. And so, you know, I try and remind people that, you know, you're going to work for a goal, and the goal was not money. That was just a transition state to get to all the other things that you wanted out of life.
I love how you define health in the book as a rate of decline or a management of decline. And an investment in health is basically lowering the rate of decline. And you note that negative health habits in particular tend to compound. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So I like to use an example, like just use the knee example or any kind of example. Like it's very, you know, I think the holistic doctors kind of have it right. Like in terms of like, you know, if you're a pound overweight, right, it's 3 to 4 pounds of force upon your knees, right? Extra that your knee wasn't designed, and there's cartilage in your knee. And so you tear up that early, right? And then you can't walk as much. And you gain more weight, your back starts to hurt because now you're using all this weight to carry, you know, the fat is distributed in a certain way, and now you have a back problem, right? Now you're at the chiropractor, you're thinking about knee replacement surgery and some sort of back surgery or pills, and you're taking all kinds of medicine for your back and your pain, but those have side effects. You can't sleep, right? And so the simple thing of being like a couple pounds overweight and affecting your knees starts to compound and go exponential all around your body, right? Now you have the sleeping issue because you know, you have all kinds of issues and you fall apart, right? Ask any kind of doctor about gut health, right? And then all the other problems that have by having it out of balance, right? You can use a house like, you know, I have a leak from the garden hose. Well, then that eroded some of the dirt, which caused your building to shift. Now you have a crack, right, in your building. And then you're like, well, this door won't shut. Why won't this door shut? And you're like, oh, it's because of the crack. No, it's because of the leak, right? And so this is how our bodies work. There's these systems that go on. And when something's out of line or going wrong in your health and you're not taking care of it, right, it tends to spread through all other areas of our body and cause all sorts of problems, which causes our inability to enjoy certain activities or actually do activities, right? Because there's your ability to do the activity and whether you enjoy it, right? And so it almost has the same effect, because if you don't enjoy walking, you won't do it, right? Whether you're able or not. And then you fall apart and you don't enjoy life and you die sooner.
Now, in the book, you mentioned that you've worked with Christian Rena at Lifespan in LA, I think. This is presumably a boutique health spot where you do preventive screening, probably quite expensive. At what stage in your life did you start investing in health in that way? Call it extreme health.
Yeah. I've always kind kind of in the back of my head been like, okay, you know, and read enough to like little pieces like diagnostics are the key. Like a lot of people who, you know, if you diagnose cancer earlier, you diagnose this problem early enough, right? Your chances of a successful outcome, you know, one that you want goes up, right? And some of the cancers where they're like, oh, this is always fatal, it's because they catch it too late, right? There's no diagnostic test. I think it's pancreatic cancer, but I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But so I was like, okay, it can't hurt to have the diagnostics to attack anything that may be wrong with me. And then also, you know, correct any kind of behaviors or diets or foods or things that are going on with me before it becomes an issue. Because like I said, these things compound over time, even if they're small. And so I actually picked this up in the poker world, right? I play poker and there's lots of old guys who play poker. And I was in LA and they were like, oh yeah, we do this lifespan thing. It came up. I was like, I need to check this out. Like different philosophy, right? Their philosophy is like, your problem is not my annuity, which is kind of like the typical doctor, right? Like the typical doctor is like, just get the diagnosis right. You come in, I write a prescription, right? And go, and you know, you go away, you'll come back with another thing, right? Lifespan's philosophy is like, we're going to treat you, the whole you, to get you into the best possible shape that you want to be. What is the best version of you? Not the average you, right? Like who wants to be the average American given the obesity epidemic here? But like, what is the best you can possibly be? And so you're right. There's about 5 to 10% of 5% doctors in the United States that kind of have that belief, right? Like you're not my annuity. I'm here to help you be the best you can be. And so part of that is a metric fuck ton of diagnostic blood tests, et cetera, and lots of checkups, et cetera, and then interviews about like, what are your goals? What would you want to be? Like, where do you want to be? How can we get you the healthiest you possibly can, given the latest and greatest in science and technology? And then what's your risk profile? Like what would you like to be? And here's a risk reward of trying to do that, right? And so given who you are, your blood type, genes, et cetera. And so I was like, it's time for me to go do this. It was time for me way back when, right? But you know, it's always now. It's never any other time but now. And so I was like, okay, let me do this, and signed up. And I'm very happy I did.
Now, is part of their technique doing imaging before there's a problem? Yeah,
there's imaging. There's the routine things. There's imaging. There's tons of blood vials drawn quarterly or at least twice a year. It's the complete mock-up, right? And then if there's something going on or something out of range for your body, there'll be more tests, right? There'll be a specialist. You're going to go to the specialist, and we're going to dive deep on this particular issue.
Super random question. Yeah. Do they have a view on HGH? Because I was taking it for my elbow recovery, and I have to say it has some strong benefits. I wouldn't take it on a regular basis just due to the risk profile, which honestly I can't really speak to. I just have an intuitive sense that it might cause cancer.
Yeah, I think so with the HGH, I don't know if they have like, this is our overall view. They use it, look at it as a tool, especially in aging as older people, right? And it depends on what you want. I remember the concern that Dr. Renner, and there might have been other concerns, is that HGH can be confused with something else. And if you're like pre-diabetic or your blood sugar level is, it can kind of push you into like a diabetes.
Yeah.
Diabetes, right? Like, and so there's concern about like where your blood sugar markers are, et cetera, like HGH molecule being confused by X, Y, and Z, and then messing with your glucose, et cetera. Now, guys, I might be screwing this up, right? Like, so don't kill me, Dr. Renner, and don't kill me, you medical warriors out there, like whatever. But that was explained to me as like, hey, we need to be careful about this issue of how this molecule, right? There's, also people talk about cancer risk or whatever, like not in terms that it causes cancer, but that if you have cancer or anything, that it can accelerate the growth of cancer cells. I've heard that, whatever. That wasn't a concern given the diagnostics and et cetera, and all the other markers in my body, that wouldn't be a concern. So those are the things I've heard about. That's their view on HGH. I mean, I don't want to speak for Dr. Renner. I can, put you in touch with him. He's actually a great person to interview.
Yeah.
Great. Like
that would be
him talk, and
that would be phenomenal. Yeah. That you don't hear people talk about HGH. Have you tried it before?
Yes.
And
yes.
It feels good, right? Like, good.
I really didn't notice that much of a difference except for my skin. My skin looks great on that. Stem cells and HGH, people are like, oh, do you notice this? I said, the main thing I noticed is my skin looks really good and heals fast.
So you've tried the stem cells before?
Yes. I tried my own stem cells. So way back when, they would take your fat, like a little bit of your fat, get the stem cells out of it, grow them, and then re-inject them into you. So, and then, because I was like, whoa, I don't want to try anybody else's stem cells. Like what's going to, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want any foreign, you know what I mean? Like, but I was okay with them, like taking my stems out and spinning them, or, doing whatever they do and then growing them because they're mine. And I'm not going to have like these rejection or issue. And so then the technology caught up from, that they removed whatever caused people to have reaction to other stem cells. And, stem cell technology is just like flying, right? Because, us people who don't want to die and want to be healthy are like willing to pay a lot of money. So there's a lot of research into stem cell. Plus it's cutting edge frontier stuff. And so now, it was cord blood stem cells and young stem cells to make sure that they don't senesce, they don't die early, and all this other kind of stuff. And so stem cell lines have gotten a lot better where you can actually, I feel comfortable using the latest, greatest stem cells that are out there.
I love it. I've got to do some deeper research myself.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about personal finance. On the unquestioned assumption front, you point out that many people take advice either from a financial advisor or from stuff they read, and they don't realize that there's an incentive structure behind that.
Right.
And for financial advisors, they would never advise you to do an annuity, because if you took half of your money and put it in an annuity, that would be half less income for them. And to be honest with you, I hadn't thought about annuities before I read your book. I would imagine many people haven't, but you make a pretty strong case for it. And you cite what you call the annuity puzzle, which is the fact that economists think that annuities are a very rational way for people to plan for lifetime consumption. And yet most people don't use annuities. What led you into researching them, and what's your current view?
Well, so the first part was what led me to think about it. And the real thing is when I talk about this idea, like die with zero, right? People are like, well, what if you run out of money or whatever? And I'm just like, guy, fucking buy an annuity. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, if you're worried about running out of money, buy a fucking annuity. Like, stop with your bullshit. Like, stop trying to give me this excuse because you really don't want to think about your life. And you want to be on autopilot, so you're trying to act like your own insurance agent, right? Like, so people, like, what if I read money? What if I lived to like 102 and whatever? Besides the fact that as you age, you spend less money. That is like an axiom of life, right? For 99.99999% of the people, even with rising healthcare costs, you spend less money because you do less. People were using this like excuse of like, well, I'm going to work or whatever because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know, what if something bad happens, or what if I live too long, right? And so I was kind of deconstructing their arguments or their fears or whatever it was, and saying, oh, there's an insurance part of why you're wasting your life. You're working real hard right now to play insurance agent for yourself. And I'm like, well, if the income part is you're trying to insure, right? Let's take that part of it, right? Buy an insurance policy. Right. Even if it was like, people don't go out and be like, well, I'm going to work overtime today because what if I get in a car accident? They buy auto insurance, right?
Yeah.
And so like, it's kind of irrational for people to act as their own insurance agent for a client of one, right? Insurance companies don't work unless they have thousands of clients, right? To get the law of large numbers on their side. They have actuarial scientists on their side. They've done all the math, et cetera. And they have financial engineers on their side. They have all kinds of people to do this stuff. So like when you buy an annuity, their margins, even though they're making a little bit of margin, it's not that great, right? But think about the margin of you working overtime in order to have more money just in case you live an extra 5 years, right? So they're going to be more efficient, and it's going to be more optimal for you to buy the annuity than to waste your life trying to play insurance agent. And that's how it came to me, right? Like that's why I think of it.
There's a lot of security that comes with an annuity because you know that it will be there every month until you die.
Yeah.
A lot of people try to capture an annuity through their own like investment portfolio. Correct. And the result of that, you think, is that most people's observed behavior is that they never spin through principal, which they kind of should, in an optimal consumption way of thinking.
Yeah, they to the extent that you don't spend down the principal, that's inefficient, right? That's a lot of waste. And that waste, I don't want to just like, oh, waste is dollars. No, this is hours of your life. These are times that you didn't spend with your family or your loved ones or take the trip that you wanted to take, right? This is you like essentially going to some sort of like jail away from the things that you really wanted to do, right? In exchange to have this capital. And if you don't use that capital, it's like, well, why did you go to jail, right? So, and I like to put it in those terms to like be very forceful to get across, right? Because people want to be right and they love to stay in their habits. And I'm like, I want to put it in a new perspective for them to break those habits, right? So I like to use forceful terms or scary terms like jail, like, and so, people like they try and play their own financial genius or wizardry, right? Like I did this with college, like when college was like, oh, I need to start investing and saving for college, right? And then they came out with these 529 plans where you can like prepay for college and it's always the same price, right? I was like, wait, am I going to try and like gamble that I can beat the inflation of college, right? In the market, right? And gamble, or I can lose that money, or I could just buy college right now, right? And it's locked in, right? I was like, no need to gamble. Here we go, right? And so it's kind of that type of planning and thinking about your life and what your fears are, right? Like my fear was college was going to skyrocket and go up into the stratosphere versus my ability to pick stocks and make a return. And I was like, why am I gambling when I can just buy the 529 plan? They give you a small discount and you're locked, right? And so, people are out there gambling, right? They're gambling two ways. They're like, well, I might live longer, right? And then they're also gambling that, hey, my stock portfolio is going to do well enough to cover me living longer. And it's just kind of like this. So now I have the risk of ruin and I could live longer. And it's just like, guys, there's people out here who are experts who do this. Like why are you trying to beat them at their job? You can't. Yeah. Like stop. Like you can't beat the house. They're the house. Like just go with them, get them on your side, And an annuity is a bet on yourself in a way. Yeah. It's a bet that you'll live longer than expected, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Like that's like, so that's why it came up, right? People are like, well, that's easy if you know exactly when you're going to die, blah, 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 blah. I need to keep working like a monkey to save in case I live to 155. I'm like, well, buy an annuity, stop working like a monkey and enjoy your life. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now you mentioned inflation with regard to college. A lot of people in the poker world, they gravitated to Bitcoin primarily because they worried about inflation and they didn't trust the government. They didn't trust the government to maintain the value of the dollar. I guess one drawback of an annuity is that you are somewhat trusting the government to be responsible. Yeah. You can buy inflation protected annuities. I didn't know that. You can do it. I didn't know that. Listen, if you're in finance, there's a product for everything, Like they will design a product for you for everything. This is the, this great thing about the United States of America. They design all kinds of things.
So of course, this is not financial advice, but is there a firm that gives good advice for these types of insurance contracts, these annuities? And for listeners that don't know, annuity is you give a lump sum and then you get a fixed payment until you die.
Yeah. In the future, I don't, I want to say like your standard people, but then again, the incentives, right? We're not aligned, right? They try and steer you into products that they get the most. But I think if you had a good paid financial advisor, right? Not paid as like a percentage of your income, but like a paid hourly, right? Mm-hmm. Like the incentive structures, right? That they're going to offer the gamut of tools to you correctly, right? So, but I don't have a recommendation. I'm not like, hey, JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or Jay Aaron, right? Like, I don't know. But I think the main thing to do is that, and this is not a knock on any financial advisor. I'm just like, to get the incentives aligned, right? I'd rather pay them a fee than pay them a percent, right? Because what do they want? They want the assets under management to be as large as possible, right? Because they get a percent of what's going on. They're gambling with your money and they get a percent. But if I'm just paying a fixed fee, they're like, I need to give the best advice possible to get those incentive structures aligned. And then it's also, when you talk to your financial advisor, right? I think one of the things people do, right? They come up with the mindset, which comes from like history or the universe, is like, I want the most money. I want whatever. And it's like, no, you have to sit down with your financial planner and be like, these are my goals. When I'm 65, I'd like to go on a boat trip. I like to go hiking. I like to live in sunny Florida in a condo. I like to do X, Y, and Z. And they sit down and they're like, this is going to cost this, and this is going to cost that, and this is how much you have now, and this is how much you're working. They're going to be like, okay, you need to save a little bit more for these things. You can spend a little bit more, blah, blah, blah. And bing, this is what we need, right? This is what I recommend, right? Oh, and you're concerned about this? I think you should get long-term care insurance, right? You're worried about like not being able to care for yourself or your grandma. Let's buy long-term care insurance. These are the best guys that have it, blah, 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 blah. If you buy it now, it's cheap. They'll take all the financial risk or whatever, and then they'll spit out a nurse for you later on in life at the right time, right? And so that's kind of what you need to do. It's not just, I want an annuity, right? Which nobody wants an annuity. Nobody wants a nurse. What they want is a fucking life. Right? You want a fucking life. You want the life that you want, right? And so when you sit down with the financial planner, when you go to your job, everything is designed for you to have the fucking life you want. And that's how you need to be thinking, right? And that's how everything needs to fit in your life. And you're like, oh, I have these concerns. Okay, let's bring the tools, right? These are fears. These are the things that you don't want to happen. Let's bring the tools that efficiently deal with this. Not you running around working overtime like a monkey, wasting your life, right? Like, and so, the book is about optimizing your life for net fulfillment, about you getting what you want out of life. Now, it's not like a book of financial tools or a book of buy an annuity or buy that. Those are there, particularly in response to people's objections about, it's easy to say to have the most fulfilling life. It's easy for you to say die with zero, right? And they come up with these excuses. And I'm like, listen, the United States of America is a wonderful, wonderful country with wonderful, wonderful businesses and wonderful, wonderful entrepreneurs that solve all kinds of interesting problems. And the problems in finance, oh my God, they got the gamut of tools. You just need to come in with the mindset of like, I want to use these tools to enhance my life. The same way that money is there to enhance and fulfill your life, not the other way around. You are not there to accumulate money. Money is there for you to accumulate life.
Now, I imagine if you have an updated edition, you'll include a couple of pages in lifetime care insurance. You tweeted recently that you thought that was a good idea. That is to allay anxieties about extreme health costs late in life. What is that?
Well, I think I'm older and I have older parents, right? My dad died, and when the last, I think maybe 5 years of his life, I took care of him, and I paid for it wasn't me particularly taking care of him, but I had 2 round the clock nurses. He had 24-hour nursing care. in an assisted living at one point, I think like maybe the last 2-3 years. Right. And so, and I'm fortunate enough to afford that, right? I can do that. And I'm not saying everybody's going to have that extreme case, but if you're not, in our culture, right, we don't live with 7 of our aunts and uncles, et cetera, where everybody takes care of each other, right? There's a saying that, Americans die alone, Japanese don't. And so, I'm going to go through this with my mother and other people in my lives. And I realized, like, when you look at the cost of these things, like $50 a month or something like that for long-term care insurance, when you do it early, right? Like these guys are doing the financial engineering and gambling in the stock market or whatever they're doing, using depreciation tax, whatever. And they're like, the cost of nursing and service is going to be X in the future. And they're taking that gamble, right? And you're like, hey, it might be a good idea to lock that in, right? So that I don't have this fear of like, who's going to help either my loved one or myself later in life. And when I look at like kind of, inflation and wage inflation and things going on, I'm like, this is not a bad idea. This takes a lot of stress off my palate, other people's palate. The prices seem extremely reasonable. And it seems to be, especially the way we're living, like the way we're living and eating, it seems to be like more and more of a necessity later in life.
So one of the themes I take from your book is know the gambles that you're taking. And I hear you talking. It sounds like you think people are taking a lot of gambles that they don't know they're taking. For instance, trusting their retirement to the stock market.
Correct.
For instance, you say that you trade some stocks, but you basically don't put a lot of faith in it. I wanted to ask you some questions about trading. I obviously follow your Twitter pretty closely, and you've mentioned that you're a natural pessimist and one should trade along with one's natural personality type. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm a pessimist in terms of, I'm a pessimist in prices and just in general. Which means I'm really an optimist in progress.
I
right?
see. Yeah. You're an optimist in supply curves or in technological progress.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like it's like, I'm one of those guys that I guess maybe because I went to school for electrical engineering and I've seen the progress and I've seen too many price of memory graphs in my life, right? Like if you look at the price of memory over time, it's one of my favorite charts. It's like a straight line down no matter what, no matter how many iPhones happen, blah, blah, blah. Now, recently we have supply chain issues and we have a little blip. We also had a tsunami. We had a little blip there. And that chart is log normal, right? So it's not even like a linear chart. It's a log normal chart straight down. You can look it up, like pull up graphs, the price of memory over time, click on images, and it's just an amazing graph, right? And so, price of TVs, you're like, oh, cars are expensive. I'm like, well, if you buy the luxury car, but you can buy like a nice $10,000 car and it is fucking fantastic to a car 10 years ago, right? Like it's got the Bluetooth and the so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. It's like got everything, right? And so, and there's tons of entrepreneurs out there who are out there to make things better, faster, cheaper all the time, right? And so, companies that have these things that they're making and like, oh, I like this and I like that. Oh, there's somebody who's going to come along and destroy that value, and take a small piece of it and deliver it faster, better, cheaper. So I'm always concerned about that, right? And I also look at like indices, like, well, the Dow, this. I'm like, the Dow's not the same Dow that it was 30 years. It's actually an actively managed index, right? So is the S&P 500, right? They're constantly pulling things in and out. Right? If you're like, well, I wish I bought the companies in 1920 and the Dow. I'm like, they're not there anymore. Maybe one, right? Like you'd be busted, right? They have to actively manage it. And so that's how I'm kind of a natural pessimist. And I'm also concerned about the risk of ruin. I'm like, I'm a human being and I'm going to die. I'm not going to be here for 200 years. I can't sit here and wait for another 30 years for the stock market to recover, right? Over time or next 20 years. And so let's even shorten that. Like, let's say it's one of the big drawdowns and I'm 65 and it's time for me to take the money out and pay my bills or go on the trip I wanted to go on. But my portfolio's destroyed. I don't have 20 years. I'm dead in 20 years, right? So I can't take the risk of ruin. So I'm a little, that to me doesn't seem like an effective tool for me to maintain my wealth, right? To build wealth, to take a gamble, right? I might do it. I'm like, it's time to gamble, but like to actually maintain my wealth and stay wealthy, to me, it doesn't seem like an effective tool. And, people talk, well, what about inflation? Whatever. Like I bought tips. I fired into tips or inflation protective securities, right? And so for the U.S. Treasury, and they changed the principal based on the inflation rate. You get a nice little adjustment. Got a nice little adjustment this past quarter, a little 8.5% kick up, right? And so I'm like, okay, my thing is like, if I'm worried about something, I try and get as close to the risk to offset it exactly, right? You might argue that the CPI doesn't correctly measure inflation, but it's as close as possible. Like I don't want to have this like loosely correlated inflation hedge that used to work over time, but doesn't work now because of X, Y, and Z. I want to be right there, right?
I made the case at F1 that one of your new inflation hedges should be a big wine collection for your new restaurant. Can you talk a bit about your new restaurant?
Yeah. One of the experiences I want to have with my fiance is us working together, right? Us doing projects together, right? And so she's a big foodie, and I like lounges. And we decided, and I'm a vegetarian, and we decided to have a vegan lounge club restaurant. It's going to be called the Jupiter Supper Club. It's named after my great grandfather to the fourth, who fought in the Revolutionary War as a slave under General Rensselaer. And so it's in Austin. We bought the building. I'm going to spend way too much money making it basically an extension of my house, like the coolest place. Like when people go there, they're going to feel like they stole something. I had friends like, can I invest with you? I'm like, you don't want to invest. I promise you, we're never recovering the CapEx ever. And so we're going at it, and it's already producing great memory dividends and projects, just kind of like how we want to design it. We're already thinking about it and getting the designers and ideas and vegan high tea and kitchen open till 4 a.m. and all these kinds of things we want to do. Like, what would we like if we went to a place? How would we want to have an experience? What experience would we want to have? And so super excited about it.
And you say that some people sort of go over budget on lighting by spending $150K or something, and you have budgeted $2 million for your lighting?
Yeah, well, actually, it's not lighting. So I want to have this room. I went to Casa Gaudi, like when I go into Barcelona, like tour these houses, and in Casa Gaudi you tour the Gaudi house that he designed for a family, and then at the bottom there's this thing called the Dragon's Lair. Okay, and it's this big giant room cube that everything is a screen, right? It's kind of like a Star Trek holodeck, even the floor. And you go in and close the door, and then like this show goes around. It's like crazy. You're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is so cool. This is so cool. And so I've always just been thinking about that. And actually I wanted to make like a small one. Like, you know how when you go to a wedding, they have a photo booth? I wanted to have like the cube, right? And people just have this kind of like wedding experience, but it was like too expensive to do for one-time use, and design for the weather. And I've always been thinking about that. And so when we looked at the space, there's like kind of this area in the front bar room, then there's like a area where they had a stage, and then there's an upstairs and yada, yada, yada. And so I was like, wouldn't it be cool if the stage was like the cube, like the stage room? It was like all these alpha lights all around in the cube. And so I'm like, I'm very, once I get attached to an idea, I'm like, oh, yeah. Like I gotta do it. Like I can't. I can start getting impatient, and so I'm like, all right, fine, it's gonna happen. Like now that I've thought about it, whatever, I can't imagine myself 5 years hence and be like, oh, I didn't do it, and always going, wow, that would have been cool, but I wish I did it. So now that one room is going to be this giant like holodeck where it can be set to any type of experience. Imagine having shows there. Imagine having vegan high tea and you're in like Tsarist Russia at the time, you know, or you're in, I can set the environment to be whatever it is. I can put all the kind of crazy shit. Listen, so I'm happy about that.
That's awesome. And who programs the experiences, for instance?
There's there's digital artists that do that. Like I know, like some of our audience has probably gone to like a concert or Diplo concert or Rufus the Soul concert, and they're playing, and you look at the screens, and you're like, wow, this is so goddamn cool, right? Like, you know, this is amazing. So, but imagine that's all around you, on your feet, you're in it, you're immersed into it, right? Like, so imagine that, and you're like dancing or you're having tea, and it's like whatever experience you have. And so I'm pretty psyched to actually experience it myself, you know, to be able to do it and be part of it. And it'll be the first one in North America. They have these in different continents, but they've never had one set up, a cube set up in North America. So I am like, you know, working with the designers and the engineers and be like, all right, how do we get it and how do we get it right, et cetera. And I'm just like, the budget just keeps going up and up and up. So that's why I say when people come to Jupiter Supper Club, not only will they have a great experience, but they're going to go out feeling like they stole something, because I'm building it for me and myself and Lara to have this experience and enjoy it and really love it. You know, it's a labor of love, not necessarily this business. But with the wine, what you convinced me of, right, was that I said that you asked me what I'm going to do with wine. And I said, well, I have friends that have extensive wine collections. And one of the things they have done is they have used restaurants to store their wine and allow them to sell their wine at a markup and take a piece. And then they don't have this storage cost, right, of the wine. And you said you should own the wine anyway, because it's a limited resource. It's inflation protected. And you're going to have wine anyway. And I started thinking about it. I said, that's not that bad of an idea. I actually do believe in the thesis that wine is a limited resource with population growth, and more and more people are drinking wine. I am kind of bullish the prices, and I do see the scarcity of it. And I was like, all right, maybe I'll take the money that's just sitting there earning 0.5 and stick it into the wine cellar.
Well, I'm extremely bullish the prices. The problem is that as an individual, I'm bullish the prices, but also want to drink the supply.
Yeah.
As a restaurant, you could be bullish the prices and have it all on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And be like, this is my inventory, and I expect it to increase at a rate of 15 to 20% a year, because the supply is going down rapidly every year and the demand is going up rapidly every year.
Yeah. That was a good point of it. I mean, I don't mind that play. I don't mind putting it. I mean, I'm more focused on right now. I mean, I want to have the most ludicrous customer experience at a vegan restaurant you possibly have. Like I'm like big in experiences and experience for myself. And I'm just like, how great could I make this? And, you know, to the point where, you know, I was talking with the consultant, it's like, well, the marketing and whatever. I was like, marketing? We're not fucking marketing. If we're not good enough, that word of mouth, that people aren't like, hey, you have to come here, then we're not good enough yet. And I don't want to market to them. Right. I want it to be like, you know, I think about that. I think like some of the places that I want to go and I want to get into, there's no marketing.
Oh, right?
Yeah. They're like the experiences. Like there's no TV commercials or brochures or magazines, whatever. It's like, you heard about it. And people are like, you have to go do this, and you're like fighting to get in, right? Like you're putting in significant effort into getting these places. Now, I want to have that type of experience so that people want to travel to come to this place, both in the food, the customer service, the total experience, and the atmosphere and the ambiance and the vibe.
I love it. I have two final questions for you, and they're related. You have a startup, Sky-Fi, that sounds fascinating. It's basically like a usable version of Google Earth. And the way that it's related to my second question is, recently you posted on Twitter that you made an impulse flight to go recruit at a school that had very talented young engineers. And so having just finished teaching this quarter myself, the second part of the question is, what advice do you have for 20-somethings? You write a lot in your Twitter threads about the importance of programming, but what general advice do you have for someone in your 20s? And then for your startup, what are the kind of super talented kids that you're trying to recruit?
Yeah, for the 20s. I mean, I generally, with the young people, I tell them, realize the asymmetry of your position. Like, you should be taking so much fucking risk, and as much risk as you possibly stand, and a little bit more. And I also try and clarify that, as let them know that they're young, they can recover. Like, look at President Barack Obama. In his book, he's talking about he's doing crack, and then he's a president 7 years later, right? Like, he's despondent, job, not knowing where he was going to be, whatever, doing drugs, and then he's the president of the United States of America 7 years later, right? Like, I remind them of dynamic decisions versus static decisions, right? Like, later on in life, you're going to make things like, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, and these kids affect every these decisions affect every subsequent decision, right? And you haven't really done that. They limit what you can do, and then on top of that, your risk profile is not just you. You're not like, oh, I'm just going to go jump out of a helicopter and pull a parachute. Like, you don't have the right to take that risk because you have young kids, or et cetera, right? Other lives. And so the asymmetry of your position allows you to take, very, very good risk reward bets with your life that you won't be able to do later. And so make sure you take advantage of that, right? That's the biggest thing. And I don't mean it just like financially. I mean it like emotionally. I mean, like, many people won't move, right, for an opportunity because, well, I've always lived here and so-and-so's here, or whatever. And I'm like, do the math. Like, if somebody lives 2 miles away from you in New York City, right, they might as well be 2,000 miles away, right? Like, you can come fly back and visit them. Like, you might actually move out of town and see them more, right? If you're in New York City, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, I'm not crossing town to the east side, I gotta go down, get on the AC&E, cut over, right? Like, you just don't see each other as much, even though you're in the same city. You're like, a mile and a half away, right? You might as well be 500 miles away. And so, that is kind of like my biggest advice to them is like, emotional, spiritual, financial, career-wise, et cetera. Take those risks and follow your passion. A lot of people just kind of like, oh, well, this is the job and I'm supposed to be in here or whatever. And I'm like, no, go do the thing. Go do the thing you want to go do. Take the risk.
Now, you've mentioned coding before as something that's worth the time investment. That is a real investment because you're talking about hundreds of hours of real pain in the prime of your life. Like, what leads you to believe that those are hundreds of hours that people should invest in?
So the investing, there is, in my experience, whether it's lawyering or whatever, like coding, being the person that can tell machines what to do. And machines are wonderful. They're great. These computers are wonderful. They're dumb as fuck, right? They need humans to code them, to tell them what to do. And then they do things at scale that humans cannot do quickly. And it becomes very valuable to society, to everyone, not just financially, but just in the insights that they provide and the things they can do. And so those positions, telling machines, not only does it help you, but you're just always in demand. Like, and I'm literally like almost in fist fights trying to hire programmers, right? And it's wonderful, right? Like, I complain about it, but I'm also happy about it because the fact that I can't hire a programmer, like these guys are like, we're a startup, right? We haven't set up our ESOP, our employee stock option program, right? It's just like day 5, right? We're trying to hire. What's your ESOP? Oh, we don't have one. It's coming. fuck you. I'm out here. I'm going to come. I'm like, wait, this guy like just like, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God. And then the next person comes in and, you know, you hire one person and they get like in between them accepting or whatever, somebody else steals them away. Right. And, you know, normally you'd be like pissed about it, but I'm like, wow, this means that lots of people are working on interesting problems to solve. So life is going to get better. Right. Even though I'm disappointed that I didn't get them to work on my problem, right, that I want to solve, the world is out there using this resource completely to solve all kinds of interesting problems. Right. And that's the great thing about it. Right. So even though selfishly I'm like, shit, I didn't get this superstar programmer, she took off. Right. I know that they're going out there and there's a high probability that something wonderful is going to happen to make my life better or my kid's life better.
What type of programmers are you hiring at Skyfi, and what are the major projects?
I mean, it's, you know, I'm not like the CTO, but like I say, it's front end and back end. We're heavy hiring Python and I think like Java or some version of that. You know, that's the language, but programmers can, once you're a programmer, I think they learn other languages fairly easy, right? Each language has its advantages because we do a lot of machine learning, object detection, yada, 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 stuff like that. There are other languages that are more efficient, but harder to do, you know, to implement, you know, more pain, but, and then there's front end developers. I mean, at the end of the day, the user experience is king, right? Like I always say, the customer drives all the value. Like I have friends that come out, I'm starting a business, I'm building a thing or whatever. I'm like, you're going backwards. I'm like, fuck the thing. Anybody can build a thing, right? I was like, if you show me 1 million people a year who are loyal to me and going to buy a car from me, guess what? I'm a fucking car company. I've never built a car in my life, but I bet you if you give me 1 million fucking customers who are going to pay me $50,000 for a car, I'll be a fucking car company. You show me 2 million people are going to buy a pizza every month. Guess what? I'm a fucking Pizza Hut, right? So the relationship with the customer is everything, every fucking thing. And brands, what they do is try and create a relationship with the customer. Nike, just do it. You identify me, you buy my shit. It's more expensive and it's the same fucking t-shirt as somebody else, but you identify me, now I have a relationship with the customer. Right? Fucking anybody can make a t-shirt or get sneakers made outside, etc. It's not the fucking thing, it's the customer. And so that user experience is everything. And so these front-end developers that generally program in Java or whatever the language that makes the user experience less painful, like why the fuck do I got to fill in this thing? Or why am I clicking this thing? Or why is it slow? Or whatever. Like those small clicks or frustration points for customer is the difference between your app or your service dying and somebody else taking or somebody else going there. And so, you know, that UX person and designer, that programmer that can take the UX leads, you know, direction and give that's hyper important. But then also the back end, the API that makes it work is just as important too. So they're all in there to make the customer experience, the user experience, what it needs to be. Right? It's all UX. At the end of the day, I'm just a UX guy.
I love it. All right. I can't resist the temptation to add one last
You can
question.
ask as many questions as you want. We're rolling, man. We're rolling. Don't feel free to roll.
I love it. So 75 minutes is no longer.
It's not hard cap. Nobody's messaged. How about this? We'll do a quick check. Nobody's yelling. If nobody's yelling at me, we're fine. Nobody is yelling at me. Let's go.
I love it. So you mentioned that poker has sort of slipped from the life optimization problem. Part of the getting health in order is you just have to prioritize your time so efficiently.
Right.
Running 2 businesses, doing the startup, all of that. What would be a poker event that would get you super fired up?
I mean, okay, so
or a game. Like, what's the perfect situation?
Well, I like live poker and I like tournaments, right? But the main thing is time. Like, they got to be 3 days and a nice destination, right? So, like, I'd be like fired up. I want to go there. So if you're like, hey, we got a 3-day, high roller tournament, big field in Barcelona, I want to go. You know what I mean? I really, really want to go. Right. So I'm moving things around. I want to go. Those things kind of get me fired up. Right. And if there's, it's behavior design, right? Like everything's behavior design. Right. So my motivation is my motivation. I love poker. I want to play. Right. So it's always at a certain level to play. So the next thing, behavior is a convergence of your motivation, your ability, and a prompt. A prompt is just, hey, this is happening. A reminder that it's happening. So my motivation is already high. I love poker. So make it easy for me. Make it easy for me. If make it a nice 3-day event, easy to get in, blah, 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 then I'm really psyched to play. And you can jump the motivation a little bit by having it in a nice place. Like, oh, you're already going to be vacationing here. You already wanted to go here. You already want to be in that spot. Then, yeah, I want to go. I get jazzed. But that gets me jazzed. The heads up tournaments, those things get me jazzed. Cash games get me jazzed. It's just timing, right? Like making it easy on the timing, right? A lot of these high rollers that Poker Go have, they like to make them 5 days. I'm like, I can't do 5 days. And they stagger them out, right? And I understand why, right? They want the TV content, et cetera. They like to bring out the drama, yada. But I can't do that. Like I'm not the retired old guy yet, where it's like I got lots of time and I'm doing these things, right? I still have purposeful things that I want to do that are not easy for me to cut.
So now that you've given me the overtime, I have to take advantage. On my second reading of your book, there was a passage that said that you like to rail against bank bailouts. And I said, you know what? I would love to hear Bill rail against bank bailouts. And I haven't heard that in any podcast. Yeah. So I really want to hear this spiel, which is presumably relates to the fact that you don't want to bail out others for bad gambles, or yeah. I would love to hear this.
Yeah. I mean, it started in like 2008, right? Like I took these full page ads out in the New York Times against the bank bailouts. I took like 3 or 4 out. And I was just furious at them bailing out the banks, right? Instead of, letting them fail.
Did
right?
you have a horse in the race in terms of bets, subprime bets or anything like that?
No,
shorts on the banks?
So what happened was that like the world was melting, right? These guys made all kinds of bets, did all kinds of stupid things, right? Like giving mortgages to these liar loans and over leveraging people and under this looking backwards saying, oh, real estate has never dropped more than, let's say 10 or 20% in a year. I'm like, well, did they ever fucking double in a year? This is a different context, right? Like it was just like the dumbest fucking thing. And they would actually say these things to like in Congress, well, our models, never went down. I'm like, so you're trying to tell me it can go up 8x, but not go down 30%. It's like, it's just stupid, right? It was just like the dumbest thing. Right. And so, they blame our models and the mathematicians, right? Like stop, it was just really just hornswoggle. And so, they're just like bailing out bondholders and these rich guys like me. And so I had this trade on, like I got long Goldman Sachs that was coming down, just fucking punting, gambling. Right. And then the news of the bailout comes out and the stock just fucking rips up. I make like $1.25 million in like a day. Right. And I'm like, this is fucking disgusting. Like I want to make money, but I should not be able to make money this way on a government handout to these banks. Like they should fail. The big banks should, be around. These other businesses should get destroyed. They should wipe out. They were giving money to like these banks. If you add up the money, right, they could have just gave like $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 to every single person that lost a job or had some sort of a cutout, a direct ejection, right? They're bailing out GM. And I'm like, I think the workers would have taken the money. I think they would have taken 2 years salary, retrained and went out. Let that fucking behemoth go under and let the entrepreneurs come in and not have to fight this Goliath, right? This lack of innovation or whatever bad bets they made, people might argue one way or another, but the bottom line is that it was socialism. Like it's true. Like I'm not like a Bernie guy or what's it? Robert
Reich.
Yeah, I'm not him, but it's true. It's like socialism for the rich and unadulterated capitalism, right? For the poor, the common person. And I just was like, I don't believe that. Well, let's say prior to 2008, I didn't believe that to be entirely true. There's definitely snippets of that, but this 08 was just egregious. And then it set up the model for it to be done again. Right. And so I lost my mind, took out these ads, and, it was this big to do about what was going on. And so like, it's like these guys, if they make big enough bets, right, they'll just get bailed out by the taxpayer. I don't get bailed out. Like I get knocked out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get bailed out. I get knocked out. Right. And I was just like so pissed. And so many other people get knocked out. Like, there were lots of businesses, et cetera, that they took the risk, right? They go out, they open their restaurant. Look at the restaurateurs, right? Like the failure rate of a restaurant, right? They make these bets and they get knocked the fuck out. And there's all kinds of other businesses that get knocked the fuck out. And I salute them, right? Like, because they're out there risking their capital, risking their lives, pursuing their dreams, trying to do something. There's no bailout for them, right? People forget, like small businesses, that's the biggest employer. Right? Small businesses are the biggest employers in the United States of America. But somehow there's this thing where if you have enough people that'll vote on your side, you got the unions or so-and-so, et cetera, they'll come fucking bail you out. And it's this political process of this crony capitalism, which really isn't capitalism, that I'm very much against.
So in 2008, our choice was to bail out the banks. Alternatively, we could have done nothing, or we could have, although it would have taken longer, bailed out the homeowners. And your choice would have been to bail out the homeowners, figure out that process.
Well, so people are like, oh, we're going to bail out the banks or whatever. I'm like, listen, you're FDI insured up to $250,000. Okay. So the banks can fail. Everyone's like, oh, we're going to lose our money. Like we heard arguments like that. I'm like, no, you're not. Those people like panicking at the banks. I'm like, you're insured. Your money's not going fucking anywhere, right? And so, and the homeowners, right? A lot of them were speculative homeowners buying stuff. Like the bonds on those homes were crashing, et cetera. The bank might have went bust, but I'm still in my home. If I'm making my mortgage payment, I'm not going broke, right?
Right.
Now the guys who are buying 5 condos and trying to lever them up and do whatever, yeah, they're going to go busto, but they're gambling, right? But now we have this like kind of like this asymmetric help thing going on. Like, oh, we're going to bail you out and you get a little bit, but fuck you and fuck you and you and you and you and you. But we're going to give the money to this. And, this big giant company over here, we're going to give a bunch of money. But really, it's a bailout of the bondholders. When people really look at it, like it's a little bit of a bailout of the equity holders, but it's a bailout of bondholders.
Yeah.
Right. And so people are just like, oh, the government is never going to let my bonds go busto if I invest in these companies, if I invest in airlines. And they did it again with the fucking airlines this time.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody was like, oh, you can't let the airlines fail. I'm like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? They wipe out the bondholders. Somebody else comes in and buys the airline. It still fucking goes. Like people think like, oh, like United's just going to go away and the slots are going to go away and not going to fly. I'm like, no, new people are going to come in and own the airline and it's going to run. Right. It's like, it's not going to just disappear, right? There's still demand for travel. There's still people that are going to show up. There's just going to be a new capitalization of this airline. It's going to be a little bit crunchy while that goes through, but that's it, right? But what happened is they bailed out the bondholders of the airlines. They did it again.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, everybody's going to lose their job. I'm like, no, they're fucking not.
Well, you're optimistic on capitalism, but in DC, they're not very optimistic on capitalism.
No. The incentives are not aligned. The primary thing is they want to get reelected, and the way people get elected is this giant marketing machine that goes on that costs a lot of money, and through donors, and they can have their PACs lined with donors, and they can have their voters. They can also get the voters in blocks to donate money, and then they can also win the hearts and minds of people with certain policies, right? Some pandering policy. And so if you don't understand finance, or it's very easy and very seductive for become those ideas like, oh, this congressman helped bail out my airline, and therefore I have a job, so I'm going to vote for this guy. And these guys, now they got bailed out, and the bondholders got bailed out. Who the fuck do you think they're going to give money to in the PACs, right? And so that maintains their power base, right? And so I'm sorry to be so cynical. And so but if you really think about it, it's like the airline business is not going anywhere. The fucking planes are not going anywhere, right? The only thing that happens is there be new owners. And so they bailed out the old owners, and they didn't save your job at fucking all. What they did is use taxpayers' money to solidify their power base.
Do you think that we will ever reverse the multi-trillion-dollar deficits that have become habit, or do you think that COVID created a change in government, a permanent change in government?
In my lifespan, and I look at history, I've just seen the government continually overspend, irrespective of COVID. COVID was just another excuse to the government has always used some sort of emergency. It doesn't matter what it is, to spend more money, to have more power over the finances, to spend more money, to increase the power of the executive branch. And so I've never seen that trend reverse. And I understand that history is not necessarily a predictor of future behavior, but I'm very pessimistic on that happening until the great collapse, because it eventually collapses.
So that would be an inflationary collapse.
Yeah, I don't know how I don't know how it is, but I know that it's unsustainable, right? And it could be it could rear its head in different ways, as like you're already spending all the future, you're spending all the current resources, and you're spending the future resources, and so then you have as that like those pressures start to work their way through society, right? You have distortions in way things are being allocated, and you have things being eaten up and gobbled, and you have lots of social stress. So it can tear a country apart. It has torn countries apart, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be this one big giant financial collapse. It could be just this thing is now boiling out of control because resources are not being dedicated, and it's falling apart because we couldn't do it, right? It could be as simple as like the tax dollars that were supposed to be going to maintaining the roads and not maintaining roads. I'm like, why do we have to have a roads bill, right? We pay a federal highway tax that per mile, right? That should correlate into making sure the bridges and the roads are maintained properly, right? But, the tax dollars just go into the treasury, and the treasury just does whatever the fuck they do with the money. So like, are they properly allocating the money to the roads or not? I don't know. I'm just using this as an example. Right. It might be a bad example, but you get my point, right? Like the dollars that are coming in that are supposed to be going into Social Security and making sure they go into Social Security, well, they're spent. There's no real lockbox, right? They say, it's just one big bank account, right? And they spend it, right? And so I think that you're using the roads example, right? Like, what if this is not going to happen this way, but what if all the roads just crumbled, right? People don't realize like the roads are how all our goods go back and forth. Take away the roads, we fall apart. Your railroads, look at railroads, right? Like, I mean, they're supposed to maintain privately, but like I read somewhere that if the railroads went down, the United States of America starts to starve in 4 days. All the goods and services. So I'm not saying that's the way it's going to happen. I'm just saying like, inflation is distortion of relative prices, right? Everybody thinks like everything goes up. I'm like, well, everything doesn't just go up equally. Things get distorted, and those distortions cause problems, right? And that's how you can have, this went up 5x and this is actually cheaper, or this is whatever. And these distortions in relative prices is what causes all the stress and strain, besides just pricing going up, right? One of the distortions that happens that really pisses people off is the price of labor versus the price of goods, right? So it's not just inflation goes up and, my wages went up, so everything's fine and honky-dory. Nobody cares. We're just doing zeros with math, right? What happens is like everything costs more that I use and eat and consume, and my price of my labor did not go up. That's one of the biggest distortions in relative prices that people track. But it's other things as well.
Yeah, and you traffic in commodity markets. Obviously, commodity markets have been booming, and that seems to be a driver of future inflation and probably will continue for a while. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, labor inflation, raw inputs, materials inflation, right? And it can link into other things like people don't realize like how important diesel is to other like metals and mining, right? All the machines that move them run on diesel, right? And so those go up, right? And then the cost of labor and that goes up, and I need piping to get this natural gas out or oil out, right? And steel and nickel is up, right? So what's ultimately causing that? And certain things can run faster and inflate things, and then you have kind of this runaway cycle. Although I'm always like, I'd say like 90-something% of my career, I've always been bearish commodities, right? Because I'm a believer in technology and human being and ingenuity to do things faster, better, cheaper. But, the money supply going crazy and labor, I mean, it does take humans, it does take other machines, it does take stuff like that. So I really don't know, but I do believe that when you just kind of look at each commodity and what's going on and what is planned, I'm like, prices have to go up, right? People are like, oh, we're going to have all this wind power and we're going to have these batteries. Like, that's a fuck ton of copper. You know what I mean? The wiring, that's a fuck ton of copper. That's a lot of nickel, right? Like, there's the things that we need in order to meet our goals, whether they be climate goals or population, electrifying certain populations, et cetera. I'm like, wow. I'm literally like, wow, at the amount of commodities that need to be produced and put into them. And I'm just like, that infrastructure doesn't seem to be in place, and it seems to be getting more expensive.
You have an instinct for thinking about supply and demand curves. It's just, is that always been true? I don't know. I don't know. I just, just kind of go to the most rudimentary block way thinking, like, it's kind of like, okay, like right now in energy, which is kind of like where my specialty is, right? Like, you have this kind of energy transition that has, right? And you have these vested groups, right? They're like, we gotta have it now for whatever reason. They're panicking. I'm like, I'm not judging whether the goal now, et cetera, is its timeline, et cetera, but like people are not planning this properly, right? They're making like policy, like, okay, you must have X renewables by X date, and you must have X, Y by X date. And I just go, okay, this is the fiefdom. This is the way it is. What does that mean? I'm just like 3 years ago, I was talking to energy people. I said, this is the greatest infrastructure in terms of capital change ever in the United States of America. Greater than the New Deal, greater than anything. I was like, do you understand how many power plants and steel and copper, et cetera, these rules have put in place? Like, it is a massive change. And then you have lots of intermittent renewables coming onto the grid. And to support that, do you understand how massive of infrastructure we have to put in place, or the market is going to go
fucking nuts at times, and it's going to oscillate between undersupply and oversupply like crazy, you know? And so I just kind of like, okay, this is the setup and this is what's going to happen. And just kind of like very, you know, using sledgehammer, not a tweezer, right? Like, you know, like sometimes people like, you know, you don't need a tweezer. You just need a sledgehammer. You can see it coming, right? And so I don't think I'm thinking about it differently. I think I'm just thinking about it deeply.
Do you relate to Gen X? Do you have a generation that you define yourself by?
Well, I don't. Like I've noticed, like sometimes I put out arguments. Somebody says like, "Okay, boomer," but I'm like, my parents were in the baby boomer generation. I'm not. Yeah,
you should be Gen X, seemingly.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to relate to young people, just because I kind of oscillate back and forth because I'm always like a pessimist on humanity. You know, when I look at the numbers in terms of like pollution, what we're doing to the world, despeciation, just the energy balance of food, right? When you look at like, it takes between 10 and 15 calories for every calorie of food you eat, and you just run the numbers and you add, you know, it's just like, oh, wow. If we're growing at 1 or 2%, that energy balance is crazy, right? And then if you look at like what the energy mix is to do that, like to bring that food to you, natural gas, the coal, right? And then the plastic and the packaging and et cetera, that like winds up in our oceans. I'm just like, oh, we're fucked. Right. And then, but then I also have this like kind of like optimistic, idealistic, like technology can bail us out. And there's lots of entrepreneurs out there solving all kinds of interesting problems. And then we're gonna address these issues before they become this catastrophic point. But, you know, when I go out there and I look at like what's happening to our oceans, particularly, and the water and the pollutants and the microplastics that are in your bloodstream now, I'm just like, oh, we're fucked. so I kind of have like this old, like we're fucked versus this young optimistic, we're going to solve the world, you know? And, you know, like,
do you have a preferred author or thinker for those that aren't familiar with some of the things that you're talking about, the energy balance and so forth? It's such a complex topic that I would imagine it's
it's I don't, because I don't think anybody, you know, has you know, I like following, I'll tell you who I like following. I like our world. I think it's Our World in Data, right? It was like Human Progress, which is kind of like
the Scandinavian guy or something.
It's kind of like the optimistic side of things. Like, this is how things have gotten better, right? Like, this is, you know, costs, you know, hours you have to work for 1 lumen of light, right? You know, cost of food over time, right? Like, you know, we're always focused locally, like, oh, shit got worse the past year, inflation. But like, if you look over the log chart, it's like, I don't know, you know, crude, you know, gasoline is really not that expensive. You know what I mean? It's not that expensive relative to everything else, right? Like, you know, certain things aren't going there. But the markers I follow, the things I'm really worried about, like how many different type of fish are in the ocean, and what's the population error, how much microplastics are in the ocean, and how much oil's in the ocean, and nitrates and soil levels and deforestation and things like that, right? These are the things that, like, you know, you pull one rivet out of the plane when you're flying, right? It's no big deal. So you just keep pulling out rivets and rivets on the wing, right? And then all of a sudden it's catastrophic, right? And so I look at the situation environmentally, like we're just pulling rivets out of the wing while we're flying. Everybody's fucking just having tea and having a good time and Instagramming out of the plane and all this other stuff. But I'm sitting there going, okay, I think we got about 30 rivets to go and we're fucked, right? And nobody's got parachutes. So that I get, maybe Elon Musk has a parachute with going to Mars, but you know what I mean? Like and spacesuits and stuff like that. But that's kind of like my, you know, look at the world right now, instead of looking backwards. Like, I think, you know, the progress we've made in human progress or whatever, it's kind of like, look how far we've come and look how better it's gotten, and world poverty and all these other things have actually gotten a lot better. Capitalism has lifted us out of so many issues and made the world better for so many people. But on a go forward basis, I think that, the balance sheet is not correct. And what I mean is that, let's say you have a coal company and you sell electricity to people, and people are benefits. Society's betting electricity is a great thing, right? Society benefits from that. And then you make your profits from taking in the coal, et cetera, right? But what we're missing is that you paid for the coal, you paid for your workers, you paid for the steel, but you're not paying for the radionucleotides from the coal ash that's spewing out. You're not paying for the sulfur and the particulate matter that's been coming out. Now that's changing. Now there's a cap and trade market, et cetera. But you're not paying for that environmental damage that is dispersed amongst everybody. So everybody's paying for the environmental damage, and they're paying for the electricity, and you're taking the profits. And that's not just in just coal business. I know people like to pick on the coal business because it's easy and it's easy to look at and see, but it's every business, right? You open up a cleaners, right? Do this, you do the surface, you collect it, but you're not paying for the chemicals that you're spewing into the air from your cleaners, right? And so there's two ways you can do that, right? Like we can put a cost, society can put a cost on it and put the economics on it, and then you'll put all the equipment needed to reduce the et cetera. Or we can say you just can't pollute this, right? This can't be done. And so we've kind of like had a hodgepodge of that, right? Like we have that you just can't pollute this. The problem with the you just can't pollute this is that it's a slow process and doesn't catch everything, right? And so by and large, even farming, right? Like the farmers are out there doing this, they raise the crops, they get the money for the crops, right? Et cetera. But who's paying for fucking nitrogen that you put in the river that are killing the fish down there, right? And so the balance sheet is just all fucked up.
What is the time frame that you have in mind where you've sort of pulled the last rivet or what have you? In Miami, we have our own timelines because we figure the oceans will be a few feet higher in 80 years and Miami will mostly not exist.
I mean, shit, I'm not the expert on the timing or whatever. And I think anytime somebody makes a forecast, that's like, your accuracy decreases kind of with with time, right? Your visibility, but I'm always like 30 years. Not always 30 years. I'm recently been 30 years, right? I'm like 30 years, within 30 years, like we're at a real crisis in many different areas. And I think we're at and I'm like, and that's like the optimistic case. Like I think, when I go into kind of like the level-headed environmentalists, not the people actually who are pragmatic and understand the solution, they're like 20 years and we're like severe crisis, severe.
Yeah. And that's far outside of consensus, which maybe consensus probably doesn't think about it too often, but they would certainly place it at a farther away date.
Yeah. I mean, you're just not looking at the food equation properly. You're not looking at the demands. Like it's pretty nasty. It's pretty nasty. We just like do the raw numbers and you just do raw population growth and you just run the energy equation and then you run the pollutants associated with that. And it's just like, it's insane.
And the observed consequences already are pretty severe in terms of temperatures out west and droughts and fires. And all.
Yeah, I mean, the environment, the climate one is kind of hard, right? Like, it's like, do I attribute the drought to the CO2 and the greenhouse effect? Do I attribute it to natural things, et cetera? But I like to stay more like in like things that people cannot argue against. Like, nobody can argue about the nitrogen in the Gulf and the fertilizer runoff, the Roundup and the weed. Nobody can argue the microplastics situation. Right? That's not like, oh, did the microplastics happen because it's on a 50-year Earth cycle or sunspots? That's like, no, the microplastics come from Dow Chemical right there that went into that packaging, that went into that dump, that went into the ocean, right? Like nobody can argue that one, right? Like, so I like to stick with that. Like, oh yeah, the salmon population or the fish population here is X, Y, and Z. The fact that we're sticking our food in ice engines, right? palm oil, like these policies where, you know, I think people probably think I'm crazy. I'm like, biodiesel is the devil. Like, people don't understand that they were cutting down rainforests to grow palm oil to make biodiesel to stick in engines. Because palm oil and soy oil, they're going fucking nuts because of biodiesel. And also because of food oils as well. But like, the biodiesel is the biggest environmental scam ever. And people are going to realize it too late. And it's so entrenched in this political process, right? Like, you're never going to get rid of, I'm like, I don't know how you get rid of the biodiesel thing, right? Like, you know, they said, I think there'll be about, you know, a couple 100,000, 1 million barrels of biodiesel when we put this tax program out for biodiesel and this incentive structure. Now it's like millions of barrels, right? Like, you know, like, they're out there, and there's this whole industry of like sticking, you know, growing crops and putting it in biodiesel and it's just like, first of all, it's not even energy efficient. I don't care what anybody says, right? You use natural gas to like make the fertilizer to grow the thing. Then you're going to transport it by truck, and then you got to bring it in a truck. Then you can bring it in, and then you got to crush it. And you can get the oil out, and then you turn it to diesel, and then you stick it in a truck, and then you burn it, right? And I'm like, this is not energy efficient. This is like environmentally destructive. And now you created these spiking prices and incentives for people to just like cut down everything and grow soy oil, right? And so these are the things like that I'm kind of watching, just like, oh, we're just so fucked. You're so fucked. It doesn't matter what I say or what I talk about. Like, people got to worry about like their own lives and the things they want to do, and they just don't have time to like worry about it. And, you know, they're like, 30 rivets, it's a little bit down the road. Fuck it, I'll be dead. Let the future generations worry about it.
Yeah, human psychology is impressive. Like, for instance, no one would have predicted that Miami could be having its biggest boom of all times, like a truly unimaginable boom in 2022. Like, most people would have said, no one's going to buy on the ocean property in Miami in 2022. So.
Yeah. I think a lot of, you know, I was like, oh, if people were worried about global warming and the water rising, like, how can the real estate go crazy? But then there's other variables going on. Like, there's a lot of people who were sick of the restrictions in other states and the reaction to COVID-19. And people, the tax base situation is another thing, right? So, and then that, and the warm, right? I think also people were like, why the fuck am I living in this freezing ass place? Like, they just robbed me of 2 years of my life, right? Depending how old you are, like for me, that's like 7%, right, of like my total life left, right? And of my like years where I'm walking around, I'm active, it might even be like 10 or 12%, right? I'm just like, oh fuck, I'm out of here. You know, people have pent up, you know, when you take something away from people, right? That's when they, you know, don't you always know? You don't know what you got until it's gone, right? Like that song, right? And so people got locked down and they're like, oh, no, I'm going to live, right? I'm going to travel. I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to move where I want to go. I'm going to work the job I'm going to work. Fuck this shit, right? And I think that's part of it. I think the tax structure is part of it. I think the COVID-19 structure is part of it. You know, the weather's part of it. And Florida's booming. Miami's booming.
We got to save Cali. Cali is too nice. Can't let Cali be completely depleted.
Yeah, I mean, these are tough problems because like the politics and the rules and the situation are pragmatic. Even the people who are environmentalists, like a lot of them are so clueless, right? They're very emotional and they care, but they don't have proper. They're like, some of the policies just exacerbate the problem, right? Like, I don't know who the fuck supported biodiesel, but what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like that's a perfect example, right? I don't know who is like trying, you know, the people trying to shut down nuclear plants, but I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, you know, like you're causing the problem, right? And so I put out some tweets where I'm just like, if you're an environmentalist and you're anti-nuclear or not pro-nuclear, I can't take you seriously. I just don't take you seriously. I know you care. It's not like I don't think you care. I just can't take you seriously. These type of things. If you're talking about climate change or whatever, and you're not talking about the food issue, right, and the animal agriculture, then I can't take you seriously.
Is uranium the future?
I don't know if there's a future, but I know that you're not going to put, I've developed solar plants, right? I built a very large one in Nevada, okay, a town site. It's up and running. I sold it to Capital Dynamics, which is now called Rivets, right? And I've put in batteries, et cetera. And people really don't understand the timeline and what it takes to get just 60, 100 megawatts of solar in place. I've financed wind projects in Nicaragua as part of a wind project in Texas. And so I understand renewables and pro-renewables. You guys are on fucking crack if you think that's enough, right? In any kind of realistic time frame, right? In our lifetimes, in the youngest person's lifetimes, okay? And so, China's putting hundreds of coal plants per year. It's just crazy, right? So people don't understand the energy balance and the infrastructure, right? They don't understand Germany and its coal burning now because of the way they've implemented their energy transition, right? And so, we have just kind of this weird dynamic and system of people care but don't really understand what they care about, right? How to implement effective change and be effective about their emotional and their caring, right? And then we have people that don't care. And then we also have people that use those people as weapons, right? I don't know if you saw that there's this battle going on about trying to transmit hydropower from Canada, where it's trapped, into North America. But we have this town shutting down the wiring in the process, protests, et cetera, right? And they're being funded by natural gas and other energy ventures, right? So they have their reasons, right? They got them all riled up. They're getting funded, and there's people who just paid to protest and do that. And they've shut this down. It's going to the courts about trying to move hydropower that's already there in Canada, clean energy, into the US, right? Making it more efficient, et cetera, right? And so this kind of NIMBYism, and that's one thing I told some of the developers in California. I said, listen, when you try and go build something in California, it's really not the environmentalists who are attacking you. It's your competitors through them. It happens everywhere, all the time, to use the rules and people as pawns for other economic interests. I think it was pretty public about, there was this, I don't know the very specifics, but there was this gas plant and these gas plants being built, and this guy who had a bunch of coal plants was funding the environmental opposition against the gas plants. Right. So here's this dirty fucking shitty ass coal operator, right? Right. But this is the new thing, right? This guy's already here, right? So he's entrenched, right? And he's funding the environmentalists and the opposition to these gas plants about whatever. And I was just kind of oh wow, this is amazing. This is how things are being done. And so that human dynamic and that situation and people's kind of I don't know, benign ignorance, or I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, that dynamic that goes on, it makes me extremely pessimistic.
Well, to be fair, it's complicated stuff. I care and I've read about it, but I don't really know that much. It's complicated. It sounds like one of the straightforward implications that you've drawn is that if more people were vegetarian, that would have a very strong environmental impact.
Yeah, it's complicated. And I think that's what makes it me pessimistic on all types of fronts, right? Because things eventually just get to a head. And then people are like, we just need a dictator to dictate, right? We just need somebody to cut through all this bullshit, right? Or it just ends in catastrophe, right? And so that's why I'm just pessimistic. I'm just like, okay, we're in the golden years, and for the nation, for the world, and then it's it. But I mean, this, I don't be gloom and doom. So meanwhile, while we're on the gloom and doom, make sure you optimize your life and get the most you get out of it. Like, let's be happy, But then let me switch to optimistic side. Like, there are solutions to problems that seemingly were intractable that happen all the time. And so I don't necessarily have the visibility in where that solution is going to come out of left field, and I don't even know it,
You need to start a podcast making people aware of these issues. Like, you need David Friedberg of the All In. You guys are cousins, and you need a podcast making people aware of these issues, because it honestly is an area where people are just ignorant. Like, I'm ignorant, and I try to make myself informed.
Yeah, I'm definitely ignorant of a lot of things, and that's like, honestly, you shouldn't have to be aware of everything, right? We have limited bandwidth, right? We got families and kids and things we want to do, whatever. Like, who wants to be an expert in the uses of nuclear power versus X, Y, and Z? Who wants to be an expert in like the radiation output of coal plants? Like, I tell people, like, radiation from coal plants, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, they release more radiation than a nuclear plant into the atmosphere. And I explain to them about, like, you take your minerals out of Earth, you burn it goes in the ash, flies up, you have radionucleotides, and it causes issues, right? And so, like, even so, like, when I explain, like, you can't, like, in the United States, we use coal ash in concrete. That's illegal in Europe because of the radiation. People are like, wait, what? But why would you know that? Like, who knows stupid shit like that? Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't want to, who wants to be learning all this crap? Like, you have other things to attend to. You have a life to live. And so a part of that's how people game the system, right? Is they game the system on our collective ignorance and limited bandwidth, right? They slip things by you. They put policies in place where you think, oh, that's a great idea. You're like, no, that's a horrible fucking idea, We need more people out there explaining it clearly, in the same way that health podcasts have come up and explain the complexities in a reasonable way. People need to explain the environmental concerns in a reasonable way. Yeah, we do. I just, I'm not volunteering. I'm not volunteering. I'll be a guest. I'll come on, I'll throw my 2 cents in, but yes. Well, this was so much fun. I really appreciate it. As you know, I've been trying to wrangle you for this podcast for about 6 months, and I'm very, very grateful that it worked out today. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy it worked out. I love being in person so much better than on Zoom. So really, really great that we got together. Sorry I blathered too long about environmental issues, et cetera. But, anytime I get to talk about, like, the earth, and I like to talk about it. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.